My husband lost the wedding game and had to feed Claire wine, mouth to mouth, at the wedding reception. Claire pulled out 200,000 in cash gifts and tearfully hugged my husband. "If I'd won here, would you marry me?" He responded affectionately, "I would." Everyone was shocked and everyone looked at me with mocking eyes. I didn't care at all. I was the first to clap. "Let's congratulate this couple for finally getting together. Now you have many children." Mason and I had been in love for 8 years, and we finally held our wedding on National Day. I wore a bright suit, waiting quietly in the room for him to come. After waiting for a long time without seeing anyone, I heard a burst of cheers from outside. Looking up, I saw that it was my groom, Mason, and his childhood friend, Claire. They had lost a game and had to face the punishment. There was no rush. Mason picked up the glass from the table, filled his mouth with wine, and kissed Claire's lips. Their lips and tongues touched, making a sound, and the wine soaked their collars. It took them a good 10 seconds before they separated. Claire's face was flush, and her lips were bright red and slightly swollen. Everyone in the room turned to look at me. Their gazes were filled with mockery, sympathy, and schadenfreude. Claire's hand was still on Mason's waist as she looked at me intently, without letting go, with no trace of guilt, and even with a hint of provocation. Claire laughed at me and said, "I was just helping you test the wedding game, don't be mad." I wanted to ask what kind of game would make you feed someone else's husband wine mouth to mouth at a wing, but I kept my thoughts to myself. Surprisingly, I didn't feel angry at all. Instead, I felt a strange sense of relief that my best friend didn't feel the same. She rolled up her sleeves, ready to start a fight. Mason stepped in front of Claire, glaring at me. "Audrey, if your friend dares to touch Claire today, this wedding is off." I nodded. I pulled my friend back in motion for them to continue with the gang. Seeing me silent, Mason assumed I was angry. "Can you stop being so jealous? How many times have I told you? Claire is just like a sister to me." His tone was full of frustration. I gave him a lazy smile and replied, "I'm not mad. You guys go ahead with the gang, we'll wait in the room." Faced with my calm response, he had nothing more to say and sat down to continue playing Truth or Dare with his buddies. Soon, Mason lost again, and he chose truth. Claire quickly took the chance to ask the question, looking at him tenderly. "If I weren't here, would you marry me?" As she spoke, she pulled out a black duffel bag from behind her, revealing stacks of $100 bills inside. "There's $200,000 in here. It can't be a dowry, so just take it as a gift." Faced with this unexpected scene, Mason froze for a moment but quickly regained his composure, looking moved and emotional. Amid the shocked gazes of the crowd, he slowly nodded and said, "I would." Everyone's eyes were filled with shock as they all turned to look at me. I got up from the bed hiding my entertained expression and began clapping. "Let's congratulate this couple for finally getting together. May you have many children." I said it sincerely, but everyone thought I was furious. Mason frowned and spoke up, clearly unhappy. "Audrey, how many times have I told you? It's just a stupid game. What's with this nonsense? Are you crazy? It's our wedding day. What do you mean by saying that? Are you trying to call off the wedding?" Listening to his accusations, I couldn't help but find it all amusing. Who exactly doesn't want to get married? He spoke again. "We're not even married yet, and your possessiveness is already out of control. I hate being tied down. You better change this nasty habit today." Saying that, he slammed the door. "You should stay in here, narrow-minded and jealous as you are. We can't enjoy ourselves with you around." Claire looked snug as she provocatively held onto Mason's arm. "Don't worry, you stay here. We'll call you when the game's over." On my wedding day, my husband shut me out of the room. I was forced to watch him act all intimate with another woman while the guests gossiped, holding their envelopes. Just thinking about it made me feel pathetic and ridiculous. And everyone else seemed to think it was completely normal. They weren't surprised by Mason and Claire's flirting. In fact, they acted like my role as the clown in all of this was perfectly natural. In the past, I would have flipped the table and screamed at everyone. It would have ended in an ugly argument. Mason would say that he and Claire were just friends, and I was the one with dirty thoughts. He would be disappointed in me, claiming I was ruining everything and didn't trust him. No matter what I said, he would give me the silent treatment and even me up with Claire on purpose just to make me jealous. Until I finally begged for forgiveness like a dog, only then would he interrogate me, making me admit I was possessive to the point of being irrational and that I needed to trust him unconditionally. Over the years, through constant manipulation, I had turned into a lunatic who followed me since every word. Even on our wedding day, I still found myself instinctively questioning whether I was overthinking things. But deep down, I knew it was them who were in the wrong. The door closed, cutting off the view, and only the noise of laughter and chaos from outside could be heard. I leaned against the window, watching the lively scene below. My friends followed behind, fuming with anger. This is just too much. If this wedding doesn't happen, who cares anyway? But any more words were quickly swallowed, as they glanced at my expression and chose not to continue. Everyone thought this wedding wasn't Mason's idea, but something I had begged for. Not long ago, Mason said he wanted to marry me, and I agreed. I had not only believed that after 8 years of waiting, I was finally going to get my happy ending, but today's events were like cold water, waking me up. My best friend, Sophie, who had spoken up for me earlier, was frustrated beyond words. "You've been humiliated like this, and you still want to marry him?" I looked at Sophie and said, "Then I won't." As I spoke, I started taking off the golden hairpins and jewelry. Sophie was startled and quickly stopped me. "Are you crazy?" She looked at my calm face, then said sadly, "Forget it, your happiness is what matters." May Day after the wedding. It settled down. Sophie had been my close friend since childhood and was a witness to my relationship with Mason. During college, Mason was the handsome star student, and I was just a bespectacled nerd struggling to make ends meet. Ridiculously, I also had depression. The day I graduated from high school, my father passed away. My mother remarried, leaving me with just 200, as if telling me a thing for myself. My exam results came out, and the good news was that I got into a top university. The bad news was that I couldn't afford the tuition. Even if I could apply for a student loan, the living expenses were suffocating me. Life and studies left me exhausted, feeling weak and inferior. I was bullied and insulted by those around me. I always kept to myself, avoiding others, with Sophie as my only friend. With my withdrawn personality and depression, I became an outcast. My dorm mates and classmates isolated me and even bullied me. During that time, I often sat on the rooftop, contemplating jumping off countless times. It was Mason who sat beside me, brought me cake, listened to music with me, and let me vent about the frustrations of life. Knowing I was struggling financially and had to take on part-time jobs, he quietly stayed by my side, walking with me through those difficult times. When he learned that I was being bullied, he didn't care about the mocking stares. He held my hand, letting everyone know that I had a friend. Once, at a class gathering, a girl who liked Mason deliberately made things difficult for me, daring me to kiss him in front of everyone. I was panicked, and the mocking jeers only magnified my insecurity. But Mason calmly smiled and waved at me. "It's fine, kiss me. I like you too." At that moment, the breeze lifted the hair from his forehead. As if by some unseeing force, I reached out and held his hand tightly. In the countless nights that followed, I always felt like I had grasped the hand of a god. Eventually we really got together, though no one believed in us. They envied and mocked me, saying Mason was like a flower planted in manure. His admirers never took me seriously, thinking I was just someone he spent time with out of boredom. I was incredibly anxious, constantly fearing someone would steal him away, or that he would leave me. So I did everything I could to be good to him, like a devout follower, offering up everything in my life to him. He gave me affection and a sense of security in return. When Claire came back to the country, everything changed. His attitude toward me became more and more dismissive, and his interactions with Claire became increasingly inappropriate. They had long crossed the boundaries of friendship. Yet I didn't give up. I willingly stayed by his side. I was even afraid to think about how I would live without him. I thought people aren't made of stone. Eventually, he would warm up to me. But now I felt cold inside. I was unable to warm him anymore, and I didn't want to try either, maybe. I went along with Sophie's suggestion and strode out of the room. Outside, Mason was holding Claire, and everyone around was cheering. When Claire saw me come out, she shyly snuggled deeper into Mason's arms. His face darkened. "Who told you to come out?" Mason scolded me harshly as I stood there silently, not making a move. Even now, he still thought he had done nothing wrong. I glanced at him, inferently. "If you feel wronged, we can choose another day to get married." As soon as I finished speaking, Mason grabbed my wrist forcefully. "You don't want to marry me, is that it? If you don't want to get married, just say it. Who are you trying to show your attitude to?" He glared at me, tense and furious. He still thought it was my fault. I stood my ground and spoke coldly. "Hasn't it always been up to you whether we get married or not?" Mason was so stunned by my words that he couldn't respond. Mason cared deeply about his reputation. The fact that he hadn't left already after such humiliation was unusual. Mason spoke up when I thought he couldn't take it and would ruin the wedding. "Of course, we're getting married." I was momentarily stunned, but he quickly shattered any illusion I had. "I want Claire with me." As he said this, he had already taken Claire's hand. Claire's face lit up with joy, and she quickly agreed, blushing. Anyone who didn't know better would have thought they were the ones getting married. As they walked ahead, all eyes turned back to me. People were looking at me with disdain, mockery, and schadenfreude. It was painfully obvious. Should I throw a tantrum right here and give you all what you're waiting for? I shot them a cold smile and followed behind. As I instinctively reached for the handle of the lead car, Claire poked her head out. She gave me a taunting smile. "Audrey, Mason wants me by his side for the most important moments of his life. Is that okay with you? You to gang marriage?" I was about to retort, but caught a glimpse of Mason's indifferent expression. I swallowed my words and opened the door to the passenger seat. If the groom didn't care, why should I? Just to humiliate myself? I smiled back and handed the bouquet to Claire. Through the rear-view mirror, I saw Mason's gaze fixed on me, his brows furrowed. I knew he was angry, though I didn't say a word. I just closed my eyes to rest. The car was quiet until we were almost at the hotel, when Mason finally couldn't hold back.